I always say to people, I'm not here to teach you how, I'm here to help you remember. Because like you just described, you created a ceremony, but for whatever reason, the word ritual, the word ceremony, it's been kind of circumvented.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Glam Reaper Podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Muldowney, aka the Glam Reaper. And on today's episode, we are getting all ceremonial. We have Megan joining us from Be Ceremonial. Megan, welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me.
You are so welcome. We're delighted to have you. So tell us, what is Be Ceremonial? How did you get started? And tell us a little bit, about who you are and the many millions of hats I'm sure you wear. I know you're a mom, so that's, my God.
Yeah, it's a long story. I think that's often as entrepreneurs and innovators, when we start creating something from scratch that's never been done before, I think you kind of trace back and look at where the seed started. So my husband and I built Be Ceremonial. It's an app, a platform, an online platform that helps people create their own ceremonies across the life cycle, with a focus on grief and loss and kind of those less visible moments in life surrounding fertility and divorce and organ transplants and all the kind of moments that you go through in life that you might not know what to do. And this idea kind of came to us about 10 years ago. My husband and I had recurrent pregnancy loss. So we had 3 miscarriages at different stages, while also losing his dad to ALS. And I learned very quickly during that experience that there were so many moments of grief that nobody else knew or saw, but that were so pivotal for us. You know, the day you get a phone call where somebody tells you that they've received a terminal diagnosis, like, what do you do on that day? The day that you have a miscarriage, but then 7 months later, when you reach your due date, what do you do on that day when you knew that day was coming, but you don't know what to do in honor to honor the love and the loss that you hold. So I got really curious about how we mark these moments of change in our lives. I'm not religious. I don't have a strong kind of spiritual framework. I'm a naturalist. I live in the Pacific Northwest. The forest is my temple. The ocean is my church. I go to nature to kind of experience that connection. But there's nothing kind of set in stone. Nobody tells you when you leave the hospital after a miscarriage what you should do to honor that loss. So I just started to get really curious, and I studied and researched and took courses. I became a life cycle celebrant. I became an end-of-life doula. I became a grief educator. I spent the last 10 years training up, I guess, to really understand how we could create more ritual and ceremony for those of us who might not feel like we have access to it.
That is incredible. Sorry, catching in my throat. That is, I didn't actually realize that Be Ceremonial was so many things, actually. I guess probably because I'm engulfed in the funeral space. An organ transplant, and that's amazing. Can you touch a little bit more on that and sort of how the app helps people?
Yeah. So as a ceremonialist, I've been helping people around the world for many years create ceremonies. And when the pandemic hit, I started having people reach out from all over the world, especially around end of life, trying to figure out how to, honor somebody who died when they weren't able to be there with them, or they couldn't fly home, or there was no opportunity for a celebration of life or a funeral because of COVID. So my husband, who works in tech, said, what if we were to make all of these things that you've been learning and exploring and experiencing, all of these tools, what if we were to put them in one place and then let people access them? And a big value for us is being descriptive, not prescriptive. So we don't want to tell you, here's the ceremony you should do when your father-in-law is diagnosed with a terminal illness. Like that's not helpful. But what we do want to say is, wow, this must be really heavy and hard. Here's a framework that's universal, that's existed across time, across culture. Here are a bunch of rituals that you can be inspired by. We say it's like a choose your own ritual adventure. So you get to pick and choose the things that are meaningful to you and then adapt them, bring your own life into them. And so we kind of started around grief and loss and our experiences, but then very quickly it became clear that as you flex these muscles, these ritual muscles, you will then use them in different parts of your life. So we had somebody reach out who was moving out of a childhood home, and her dad had died in that home. So she thought she was reaching out to create a ceremony around, selling the childhood home, but really selling the home brought up the grief of losing her dad 4 years ago. So the ceremony is just intertwined with so many different aspects of life. So when you go through a divorce, the same thing happens, right? Like, how do you create a ceremony to acknowledge a divorce when your community came together to witness you getting married, and then suddenly nobody is really there to witness you separating? So really, it's just about looking at the life cycle as all these moments that deserve to be acknowledged. And that, for me, is what that ceremony does. It acknowledges what we're feeling. It doesn't make it go away. It doesn't fix it or solve it. It's simply giving us a chance to say, this is what I'm feeling, and it's real and valid. And here are some rituals that can help me process that.
So interesting. You touched on something there that I'm actually still toying with the idea of doing a podcast episode specifically on. We just sold our childhood home. My parents sold my childhood home there last summer, at the end of last summer, and it was very emotional. And it nearly severed yet another tie for me back home in Ireland, which is even more sort of emotional for me. Can you talk us through what a ceremony for something like that would look like? An example of what is available on the app?
Yeah, so we built our app with the traditional rite of passage as a framework. So if you look, having been a bit of a research nerd, I love kind of looking at all the academic, knowledge. And, there's been people for the last hundreds of years who have explored and looked at what makes ritual, what makes ceremony, what is it that helps us as culture to process change. So I really drew from the science of ritual. And the traditional rite of passage typically follows a 3-stage approach. So it has the separation, which is letting go of who you were or what was. The transition, which is that kind of middle part where you're neither here nor there, but how can you be present and in the moment? And then the third part of the rite of passage, which is incorporation. So learning what weaving what you've learned through that experience into your life moving forward. So if you think of something like coming of age or a wedding or a funeral, like typically you'll go through these kind of structured ceremonial approaches. So with that in mind, there's so many ways to create a ceremony that's unique to you. There's not just one ritual that you should do. And I'll preface this by saying that there's a beautiful, important role in the world for religious and cultural ritual. And for those of us who might not feel like we have access to that, there is something else. There's this opportunity to invent and create and reimagine ritual so that it fits our life. So that's what I'm playing with. It's not about throwing out what's already there. It's about creating space for something new as well. So if you think about a childhood home, and my father was diagnosed with lung cancer a few years ago, and he survived, but my parents were in the midst of selling our childhood home. We'd been there for 35 years, and my mom was in the hospital with my dad most of the time. So I was the one that had to go through the home and decide what we keep, what we give away. I invited all my friends over, invited them to just take what they wanted, because we were all kind of moving into our homes at that point. But my mom came home one night and I said, I think it's really important that we honor this home. And so we did a couple of different rituals, but the first one was saying goodbye, like separating from what it was. And for us, that involved moving from each room in the house and thinking about a specific story that happened in that room and sharing that story. And kind of, the house was empty at the time. There was no there was no furniture. And it did feel like a funeral to the home, but we walked through the home totally empty. And I remember walking into a room and I could picture the furniture still there. And I would remember a Christmas morning we spent, or I remember a big party that we had in this other room. So we went through this house and we shared these stories, and it was emotional. It was hard. It was,
I know. Emotional.
Like, I know.
Yeah.
I know. But it should be emotional. I think there's so much about what we do in this world where we push those down and we sell a home. Well, it's not about, don't look back, look forward. Where are we moving to next? And we need to take the time to grieve and to walk through and spend that time. And Mom and I were crying the whole time we were going through, but we were also laughing and shaking our head and remembering when, so-and-so cut his finger and, all these funny stories and weird stories. So we took our time. We walked through the home and we honored what was. And then we decided to do something to kind of be really present and in the moment. and we lit a candle, and we just spent a couple of moments of silence just looking at the house. It's a really old house. It was built in Vancouver, at least. It was built, one of the original homes on the North Shore. So it had a lot of history and a lot of, soul to it. So we just spent a few moments just kind of being in that house that had held so many families before us and hopefully will hold so many families after. And then we thought of a ritual that would help us kind of carry forward. And there was two parts to it. One of them, my older brother had found this giant log on the beach nearby that looked like a claw, and he had scared all of our kids with it. So we had this big giant claw. So Mom and I walked down to the beach with this big claw and this log, and we threw it in the ocean just to kind of send it out to hopefully somebody else would find. And then we went into the garden and we dug up some of the plants. My husband and I had moved into our home at that point, and I chose 3 lilac trees because the house reminded me so much of lilac every spring. So we dug those up carefully and cried while we were doing it, and then put them in my car and brought them home and planted them in my yard. So kind of carrying something forward. So now every spring when those lilac trees blossom, it transports me right back to my childhood home. Like, it's a phenomenal experience.
I don't usually get emotional on this podcast. I think maybe because it's so fresh for me. But we didn't know we were doing a ceremony or a ritual, I guess, at the time. But like that, I felt it was so important, and so I got my brother, my mum, and my dad together, and no grandkids, no spouses or anything, just the 4 of us. Because, we were who we were in that, family home, and just the 4 of us gathered, and we actually had a bottle of bubbly, and we opened that, and, over the kitchen table, as we had done for many, many times. Only last year or the year before, I did my 40th, where we, all of these moments of life celebration. And like that, we went out into the garden, and I took something, this piece of bark that was in our garden, and I brought it back to the US. I was like, oh my God, I hope TSA or anything don't try and take it away, because I don't know if you're allowed to bring sort of, I don't know. I mean, it was just a piece of wood, but I was afraid. And yeah, we kind of took a piece of it with us, and I like that. Like, a new family has moved in, and I hope they have as many happy memories as we did. But I do think it's so important to mark those moments and notice the grief, which is why I'm kind of, should I do a whole podcast on this? Because even my TEDx talk, and a couple of the episodes actually touched on it with people like yourself, who we all know that grief and loss isn't just in the death space. It's divorce, it's friendships, it's everything. It's a job. Sometimes it's a physical item. Your grandmother left you something and now it's broken, or now it's gone. You've lost it. Like, grief just comes out in a million different ways. Moving out of a house, nobody died. We're all touch wood, we're all still good, but it's still just closing one chapter and opening another, and that's really what grief is. It's just the closing up chapter.
Yeah, and we are naturally ceremonial. We have ritual in our bones. This is not new to us. And I always say to people, I'm not here to teach you how. I'm here to help you remember. Because like you just described, you created a ceremony, but for whatever reason, the word ritual, the word ceremony, it's been kind of circumvented. And you look at Wikipedia and what it calls it and how it defines it. And that's not my version, because that feels so constrained and prescribed and performative. Whereas what you described, it was an emotional connection. I always say this is about our mental health. This is about processing the emotions as they show up. And so many of us are scared to bring that grief to the surface because we weren't raised in a culture that, was often permissible. And I mean, Irish culture, I think, is a little bit different. I'm
the ceremonial one in my family. I'm always
Mark, me too.
My brother's like, why? And parents, definitely not. But yeah, a lot of Irish people are born Catholic, and sort of, so there's ritual for sure, absolutely, but it's very tight and specific and according to certain things. But a bit like America and North America and all that, we're evolving. Those, like, I often say when I started my journey, a lot of people would have said sort of that I'm trying to do away with the funeral. And I'm absolutely not. I think it's such an important ritual. I think it's imperative. And so I believe in ritual. It's just that these rituals are evolving, and it's not just so, as you said, it's not so prescriptive. It's natural. It's a part of it.
Yeah. Well, and also the more that we show people that it's accessible, that it's simple, it doesn't have to be complex, the more we bring out of them. I remember my dad phoning me a few months ago, and his best friend was dying, and they knew it was coming. And he was part of a group of men who had played tennis together for the last 40 years. And they were meeting for lunch, and it was the man who was dying. It was his birthday. And they didn't know how much longer he had, but they knew it was close. So they knew this was likely the last time they would all gather. And my dad called me up that morning and said, I need to do something to mark this lunch. Like, it's an important lunch, but nobody else is going to do anything. And they're going to keep their head in the sand, kind of, what do I do? And I said, Dad, I can't tell you what to do. That's not my role, but tell me about your friendship with this man. Tell me about this group of men and what it means to you. And, so what he ended up doing was going into his garage and finding an old tennis racket from the 1950s. And he brought it with him. And around the lunch, he kind of bravely and uncomfortably, this is a man, born in the 40s and, from Edmonton. So this, ceremony is not natural. But he kind of said to everybody, I really want us to do this, to mark this lunch as special and meaningful for this man. And I brought this racket, and I'm going to pass it around the circle, and I want everybody to share a story. It can be a funny story. It can be a memory. It can be, something that this man impacted you with in your life. And you could see the kind of, groans and moans and, these, men in their 70s and 80s trying to figure out what to say. But my dad said the most phenomenal thing happened. As this tennis racket made its way around this group of 12 men, the tears came up, the laughter came up, the hugging, the touching, the inappropriate jokes. But slowly by slowly, each one of them got a chance to tell this man what he meant to them. And the man after told my dad it was probably one of the most meaningful days of his life. And all of these men got a chance to share something and to be together as a community, to listen to each other's stories, to be reminded at how tight-knit they were as a group. And now one of them was dying. And so how do we honor that? And my dad said it made such a difference months later at the celebration of life that they had that time, because they felt like they said what they needed to say. So that's ritual. That, it doesn't have to be much more complicated. It's storytelling. It's speaking from the heart. It's creating space for us to feel what we're feeling.
Yeah. No, it's, God almighty, I don't know what's wrong with me. You're getting emotional again on this.
I have this effect on people.
Because like my 40th I keep saying last year, how is it already 2024? My 40th in 2022, I went home to Ireland, and I gathered all my friends. So I'm not married. And my whole thing for my 40th was I wanted it to be like my wedding. So I kind of was like, no, I'm deciding it's all my favorite foods, my favorite drinks. I get to be a diva for the day, and that's it, rather than trying to please everybody. So a few people flew from America, and it was in my childhood home. My dad built like a mini bar at the back. I mean, it was just incredible. And it was a lot of work, and I'm an event planner, but it was a lot of work because I was the client and I was the planner, right? But it was amazing. And at one point in the evening, one of my closest friends, one of my longest friends, she said, let's all say something that we love about Jen. And I was a bit like, and I'm used to obviously working in this space. I'm used to encouraging people to do that. But I guess when the mirror is, when you're looking at it then, and it's turned on you, it was quite a shock. And two of my friends we joke that they're like cold-hearted, like they've panicked. They did not know what to do. But, and they kind of did back out a little bit, but they did, in their own little way. But everyone around the group said something. And Megan, was mind blown. Like, I never knew the impact I'd had on these people. Like, I knew we were great friends. I knew what I thought I brought to the table, but just hearing some of the words that they had to say back to me, my only regret, and it's actually something that I tell people about in the funeral space in general when they're doing a memorial or a funeral, is to have video to record. My only regret is that, you know, we said it over a few drinks late at night, and, you know, the next day I was like, wait, I know it was so special, but what was it? I can't remember what such and such said, and it was all, you know, it all became a blur. But it was so incredibly special, and I'll remember it forever. I can't necessarily remember exactly what everybody said, but I just remember being floored that my little life had impacted these other people, and they loved me so much. So I genuinely, whether you wait for every decade or whatever, or for a diagnosis or just some sort of a moment in life, yeah, incredible, absolutely incredible. And so fair play to your dad for doing that, because I just think, yeah. I'd say
one of my favorite quotes by Maya Angelou is, people will never remember what you said, they will never remember what you did, but they'll remember how you made them feel. And I think I paraphrased that a little bit, but it's that feeling, you know, it doesn't really even matter what they said, because you felt it, like that, you know, the Care Bear stare of love kind of coming out at you. And it just, a friend of mine, she was also turning 40 and was not married, and had decided to become a solo parent and go the IUI kind of fertility route. And she invited 30 of us, and I helped her kind of with some of the planning. It was over Zoom. We live in different parts of the world. And 30 of us came together over Zoom to witness her marriage to herself. And she said her own vows, and she kind of walked through a traditional kind of the wedding ceremony that she imagined she might have. And it was phenomenal. She mailed each of us a bracelet with rose quartz on it. So we all had the same bracelet connecting us in, I think, 12 countries around the world and multiple states. And anyway, it was just to see her have that moment. It reminded me, and just like shone a light on how crappy it is in our life that we only really know ceremony around birth and marriage and death. Because if you don't have a child, if you don't get married, you're just basically waiting for death. And then you're not going to be there. You're not going to be at your own funeral. So how can we start to bring ritual and ceremony into other parts of our lives? Like when you get promoted at work, when you get fired, like where is this, you know, where is the really, like we need to have these rituals when we're all of these little, you talked earlier about, you know, there's so many moments of grief. And on one of our video storytelling episodes recently in Be Ceremonial, we have like a library of interviews that we do with different experts in different fields around ritual, like what ritual and ceremony means to them. And I was talking with a psychologist, and he said for children, every day, every night when they're preparing to go to bed, it's a little death. It's the death of the day. And traditionally, the lullaby, if you think about what a lullaby does, and you think about the lyrics, they're really sad. And the melody is really sad. And what it's meant to do is it's meant to sing that lullaby to the child to help bring their grief to the surface about the day ending, about that little death. And having that moment of that lullaby kind of allows that grief to surface and release, and they go to bed without carrying that forward into the next day. And that's, I think, if you think about our culture, grief-phobic, death-denying culture, where we don't process our grief, we kind of push it down and it transforms into other things that we don't recognize. We need to find more ways to acknowledge that, the daily grief that we feel. And that's the muscle building for me, is if we can bring ritual into our everyday life and acknowledge those small little moments of grief when something big and hard and complicated happens, we already have this ritual muscle ready. Like we're ready to step in. It doesn't make it easier, but it does, in a sense, give us a plan and reminds us that we know what to do.
I did not expect to get this emotional on this podcast talking about, and I don't mean to say, but talking about an app, you know, it just goes to show though. And that's what I love about this podcast, just the interesting conversations I have with people like yourself. Now tell me, how does Be Ceremonial, how does the app, so who should download it, sort of what should they expect? Is there charges, or, you know, obviously you're a business, or, you know, or I don't know, you tell me how that works. And yeah, we'll leave the links for everybody in down below and stuff. But yeah, if people want to get in touch and kind of find out more, who should kind of definitely have this app on their phone or their iPad?
Yeah. And it's interesting thinking back to those first few months of the pandemic when Johan and I had 2 small kids at home, and we're just he'd been laid off. He was the head of technology for a travel company, so that was not good. I had a marketing company, and that kind of went under for a few, for 6 months or so. So we were sitting in our living room floor one night, and he was saying, what if we were to kind of turn all this into an app? And I thought, that's crazy. Like, this is sacred, important work. Like, ritual and technology do not go together. But then you kind of look at who Johan and I are, and we're the head and the heart, we're the earth and the sky. Like, you need that balance. And we believe in something called slow tech or slow technology. It's like slow fashion, slow food. So how can you use technology not to overrun your life, and not to be so addicted that you only need, like, I don't want people to only be able to create a ceremony when they go into the app and have us guide it. But we want to give them, when they feel stuck, when they feel lost, when they know that there's a moment happening and they're not quite sure how to acknowledge it, we want to give them a place to start. We want to kind of inspire them with ideas. The app is now becoming this beautiful community, which is, for me, what I always wanted it to be, and Johan did too. We want it to be other people teaching each other about ritual and ceremony. So within the app, you can create your own daily rituals. So there's rituals for how you wake up in the morning and how you go to bed at night, rituals around like anger and burnout and frustration and grief and healing. And they're to take 5 minutes or less. They don't require any like fancy gadgets, or, you don't need to go and buy a whole bunch of stuff. We really want to show people that they have this already inside of them. You can also create life cycle ceremonies. So these are more kind of rites of passage that you might go through. So maybe you're, you've had a pregnancy loss, or maybe you're making the decision to end breastfeeding and you want to kind of create a ritual around that. Where you move across the life cycle, maybe you're moving into a new home or out of a home, or having a wedding or a divorce. And then you kind of move into the grief and loss space. So you might be planning a celebration of life or a living funeral. There's all the way up until like death anniversaries and reaching the age that somebody was when they died. What do you do on that? So with that, it's a choose your own ritual adventure. You choose the ceremony you want. You go through our pick and choose kind of menu, and you pick the rituals that you like. And so there's that. There's the daily rituals, the lifestyle ceremonies. And as of yesterday, where are we? February 7th, 2024. If you're listening, we had a big day yesterday. And we launched a whole new platform within our app that has video workshops and stories from other people. So I'm interviewing different experts across the fields, looking at everything from motherhood to grief and loss to, matrimony and divorce and all of that. So finding all these experts and getting them to talk about the importance of ritual and ceremony in their lives and the work that they're doing. So having that community choir and having a stability within the app to learn from each other, and to not just see ritual as this one flat kind of version, but to really see it can be something that you can adapt in your own life. So the majority of people that come into our app usually come through grief and loss. That's usually when we feel that ceremony-shaped hole, when we're like, oh God, like I don't know what to do, and I know I need to do something, and I don't know where to start. But our hope is that when you come in, then you can kind of poke around and realize, when you're maybe your niece is about to graduate from kindergarten, and you want to create a ceremony to kind of honor that big stage in her life, because that's huge for a little kid. Or maybe your friend is going through a divorce, or maybe, your mom is turning the age that her mother was when she died, and you want to kind of support and reach out and offer ideas. So it really becomes this language that we can all communicate through. And the app is free to use for certain parts. You can download it in the App Store. You can access it in a web browser. We really try to make sure that there's something there for people who want to just explore and poke around. And then we have a monthly or yearly subscription. So we have membership models. We have an online community that you can join. You can ask questions of others, kind of put it out there, like say, when we're selling our childhood home, what should I do? What have other people done? Again, that crowdsourcing mentality. So yeah, that's what it's still just me and my husband, and we're, working hard to try to make it accessible to people wherever they are in the world, and to also listen and grow and change based on what people are requesting of us. We want to stay small and nimble. We don't want to become this giant kind of machine that just pumps out rituals. That's the opposite of what we're doing.
Sounds like it's for everyone. That's what my take is on that. It sounds like that everyone should have in their phone. or their iPad, maybe, or whatever other device you have. It sounds like it sounds very important. I mean, it sounds like there's something in there for everyone, which is amazing. Megan, thank you so much for joining us. This has been enlightening. I did not expect to shed some tears, honestly, today. And we've talked about some harrowing stuff on the Glam Reaper, but I can usually hold it in. Today must be just an emotional day, which is good. It's okay. So thank you for giving me that bit of release. Yeah, thank you so much for coming on, and we'll keep an eye on your journey, and everyone download Be Ceremonial app.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it was lovely to be here. And I think the more we realize how natural it is to have these rituals and ceremonies in our life, the less scary it feels. So thanks for the chat.